Caterpillar used to own Europe. From the cranes lifting Hamburg back from rubble to the dozers cutting motorways across France, the yellow iron from Illinois was the default on every major work site on the continent for nearly 40 years. By 1985, Caterpillar held more ground in Western Europe than any other equipment maker on Earth. Then, European competitors took it all away. Not in some overnight collapse, but in a slow, grinding, 20-year retreat that the company still has not recovered from. And the conditions that made it happen are now showing up on American job sites too. To understand how Caterpillar lost an entire continent, you have to go back to the rubble. When the Second World War ended in 1945, most of Europe was flattened. Factories in Germany were bombed to their foundations. Rail networks across France and Belgium were torn apart. Bridges, ports, roads, entire city blocks. All of it needed to be rebuilt from scratch, and rebuilt fast. The Marshall Plan sent billions of American dollars into European reconstruction, and a huge share of that money went straight to buying American equipment. Caterpillar was the obvious choice. The company had spent the war years supplying the U.S. military with bulldozers, graders, and earth movers that performed in conditions most machines could not survive. The iron had been tested in North Africa, in the Pacific, and across the hedgerows of Normandy. When European governments needed machines that could move dirt on a continental scale, they looked at what the American military had been running and ordered the same thing. Caterpillar moved fast. Through the late 1940s and into the 50s, the company built a dealer network across Western Europe that mirrored its American model. Independent dealers, each one a local business, each one stocking parts and running service bays. In West Germany alone, Caterpillar had dealer locations in nearly every major metro area by 1955. The system worked the same way it worked in Illinois or Texas. You bought a Cat machine, and your local dealer kept it running. Parts arrived fast. Service technicians knew the iron inside and out. For European contractors rebuilding their countries from nothing, that reliability was worth every dollar. Through the 1960s and 70s, Caterpillar cemented its position. The big European infrastructure projects of that era, the autoroutes in France, the Autobahn extensions in Germany, the motorways in Britain, ran on yellow iron. Caterpillar dozers pushed dirt for new housing developments in Italy. Cat excavators dug foundations in the Netherlands. The company was not just selling machines, it was selling a system. The dealer network, the parts availability, the global reputation for durability, all of it created a lock-in effect that made switching to another brand feel like a risk most contractors were not willing to take. By 1985, Caterpillar was arguably the most trusted name in European construction. The yellow paint was everywhere. The dealers were profitable. The parts counters were stocked. And then, slowly at first, the ground started to shift. The cracks started appearing in the late 1980s and accelerated hard through the 90s. European competitors that had been growing quietly for decades finally reached a scale where they could challenge Caterpillar head-to-head, and they did it in ways the American giant was not prepared for. In Britain, JCB had been building machines since 1945, the same year the war ended. Joseph Cyril Bamford started with a single welding torch in a rented garage in Staffordshire. By the 1980s, JCB had become the dominant backhoe manufacturer in Europe, and the company had a very different DNA than Caterpillar. JCB was family-owned. It stayed family-owned. The Bamford family kept control of the engineering decisions, the product roadmap, and the pace of expansion. There were no quarterly earnings calls, pushing the company to cut costs or squeeze margins. When JCB designed a new backhoe loader, the engineers ran the process, not the finance team. That difference showed up in the machines. JCB backhoes were designed specifically for European conditions. Narrower streets, tighter work sites, operators who needed a machine that could dig a trench and load a truck without repositioning. Caterpillar's backhoes were bigger and heavier, designed for the wide-open American job site. On a cramped construction site in London or Paris, the JCB was simply the better tool. In Switzerland, Liebherr had been building cranes and earth-moving equipment since 1949. Like JCB, Liebherr was a family company. The Liebherr family kept the engineering culture intact through decades of growth, and the company invested heavily in large mining shovels and hydraulic excavators. By the mid-1990s, Liebherr excavators were winning contracts that Caterpillar had held for years. The machines were precise. The hydraulics were responsive. And Liebherr's service model was built around European expectations, fast response, local technicians, and an engineering-first approach to problem solving. In Scandinavia, Volvo Construction Equipment carved out its own territory. Volvo took wheel loaders and articulated haulers and made them the standard across the Nordic countries and then pushed south into the rest of Europe. Volvo understood cold weather performance, steep terrain, and the specific demands of Scandinavian forestry and mining. The company's haulers were built to handle conditions that Caterpillar's American-designed machines often struggled with. Caterpillar's first response was to compete on price. The company cut margins in Europe, offered aggressive financing, and tried to hold share through deals rather than engineering. It did not work. European contractors were not choosing JCB or Liebherr or Volvo because of price. They were choosing them because the machines were better suited to European conditions, the dealers were local, and the service was faster. Caterpillar's second move was to consolidate its European dealer network. Through the 2000s and into the 2010s, the company merged smaller dealers into larger regional operations. On paper, it looked like efficiency. On the ground, it meant the guy running a fleet of Cat machines in rural Ireland or southern Spain now had to deal with a dealer located 200 kilometers away instead of one in the next town over. Every consolidation round pushed more operators toward the European brands that still had a local presence. So why did Caterpillar actually lose Europe? The usual story is that European competitors simply made better machines for European conditions, and there is truth in that, but the real answer goes deeper. 3 structural forces worked against Caterpillar, and the company either could not or would not adapt to any of them. The first force was leadership culture. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Caterpillar shifted from an engineering-led company to a finance-led company. The executives running Cat during its peak European years were engineers who had come up through the product divisions. They understood dirt. They understood what operators needed. By the late 90s, the C-suite was increasingly populated by executives whose backgrounds were in finance, supply chain optimization, and shareholder value creation. The company's strategic priorities shifted accordingly. Cost reduction took precedence over product innovation for specific markets. Global standardization replaced regional customization. If a machine sold well in Texas, the thinking went, it should sell in Germany too. That logic works for commodity products. It does not work when your competitors are designing machines from the ground up for the specific conditions in Germany, and their engineers answer to the family that founded the company instead of to Wall Street. JCB, Liebherr, and Volvo all stayed engineer-led through this same period. At JCB, the Bamford family maintained direct oversight of product development. At Liebherr, the family ownership structure meant that engineering investments did not need to be justified on a quarterly earnings call. At Volvo, the construction equipment division operated within a corporate culture that prized Scandinavian engineering discipline. These were not companies chasing short-term shareholder returns. They were companies building machines for the long term, and the operators on European job sites could feel the difference in every hour they spent in the cab. The second force was the dealer network. Caterpillar's dealer model in Europe was copied from America, and it worked beautifully when Caterpillar was the only serious option. Independent dealers, company-trained technicians, factory parts. But as JCB and Liebherr and Volvo built their own dealer networks across Europe, the comparison started to hurt Caterpillar. European dealers for European brands tended to be smaller, more local, and more responsive. The owner of a JCB dealership in County Cork was a local businessman who knew the contractors in his region by name. When a machine went down on a Friday afternoon, he answered his phone. When Caterpillar consolidated its European dealers into larger regional operations, that personal connection disappeared. An operator in Southern Ireland whose Cat excavator needed a hydraulic pump on a Wednesday morning was now calling a regional office instead of walking into a shop owned by someone he had known for 15 years. It is hard to overstate how much that mattered. In construction, a machine sitting idle costs real money every hour. The brand that gets it running again fastest wins the next purchase. The third force was regulation, specifically the European Union's approach to right to repair. The EU has moved steadily toward requiring equipment manufacturers to provide open access to diagnostic software, service manuals, and replacement parts. For brands like JCB and Liebherr, which had always maintained relatively open service architectures, this was not a major adjustment. Their machines were already designed to be serviced by independent shops and owner-operators. Caterpillar's model was different. The company had moved toward proprietary diagnostic systems, dealer-exclusive software, and tightly controlled parts distribution. In an American market, where CAT's dealer network was dominant and alternatives were limited, that model held. In Europe, where regulators actively favored open service access and operators had competitive alternatives sitting on the lot next door, it was a liability. Every time a European contractor ran into a service lockout on a CAT machine, the local Liebherr or JCB dealer was right there with an alternative that came with no such restrictions. If you are new here and want more videos breaking down what happened to American manufacturing, hit subscribe and stick around. What does this all look like on the ground in 2026? Let me walk you through it with a man who lived it. Einar is a composite, but his story is real in every detail that matters, because it matches what dozens of European operators have described over the past decade. Einar ran a CAT 360 excavator on road construction projects in Norway for 25 years. He started on the machines in the mid-1990s, back when every serious contractor in Norway ran yellow iron. His first machine was a CAT 320, and he loved it. The thing was built like a tank. Parts were easy to get. His local dealer in Trondheim had a service bay that could turn around a major repair in 48 hours. Einar bought CAT because CAT worked, and because the dealer made it easy to keep working. The first sign of trouble came in 2008. The Trondheim dealer got absorbed into a larger regional operation based in Oslo. Einar's service calls, which used to be answered by a man named Petter who knew his fleet by serial number, now went to a call center. Response times stretched. Parts orders that used to take 2 days started taking 5. Einar did not switch immediately. He had 20 years of loyalty built up, and switching brands meant retraining his operators and rebuilding his parts inventory. Then, in 2012, his CAT 360 threw a code that only a dealer-authorized laptop could read. The nearest CAT-certified technician was 300 kilometers away. The machine sat idle for 4 days, waiting for a diagnostic appointment. Einar called the Volvo dealer in Trondheim, a local operation run by a family he knew. They had a demo machine on his site the next morning. He ran it for a week. The cab was quieter, the controls were smoother, the fuel consumption was lower. When the CAT technician finally arrived and quoted him the repair cost, Einar did the math in his head. He ordered 2 Volvo excavators that month. By 2015, his entire fleet was Volvo. He has not looked back. Einar's story is not unusual. Walk any major construction site in Europe in 2026 and count the yellow machines. In Norway, Volvo and Liebherr dominate road and tunnel work. The CAT machines you do see are older units, running out their hours. In Ireland, JCB runs the compact and mid-size market almost completely. Irish contractors will tell you that JCB's local dealer presence is the reason. They want a service technician who speaks their language, knows their ground conditions, and shows up the same day they call. In France, Liebherr excavators are standard on major civil works projects. The Paris metro expansion, one of the largest infrastructure programs in Europe, runs primarily on Liebherr and Volvo iron. In Germany, Liebherr is practically a national institution. The company's factory in Kirchdorf produces excavators and mobile cranes that go straight onto German job sites with a domestic parts supply chain that Caterpillar cannot match. In Italy, the picture is mixed, but the trend line is clear. Italian contractors who once ran CAT exclusively are diversifying into JCB for compact equipment and Liebherr for heavy excavation. In Spain, Volvo haulers and Liebherr excavators are the standard on mining and aggregate operations. The EU as a whole is the largest single trading bloc in construction equipment outside North America. Caterpillar went from leading that market to watching 3 family-owned European companies divided up among themselves. Now here's why this matters if you are sitting in America right now. Every condition that killed Caterpillar's position in Europe is showing up on American job sites today. Right-to-repair laws are passing in state after state. Operators are frustrated with proprietary diagnostic lockouts. Independent shops are pushing back against dealer-exclusive software. The CAT dealer network in America, long considered untouchable, is under regulatory pressure for the first time in decades. American operators are starting to ask the same questions European operators asked 20 years ago. Why can't I service my own machine? Why does a diagnostic scan cost this much? Why is the nearest authorized technician 3 hours away? Caterpillar still dominates at home. That is not in question. But dominance is not the same thing as invulnerability. The company dominated Europe too, right up until it did not. The story of Caterpillar in Europe is not really about one company losing market share. It is about what happens when the people building the machines stop listening to the people running them, when the engineers answer to the finance team instead of to the operators, when the dealer network serves the manufacturer's balance sheet instead of the contractor's job site, when the service model protects revenue instead of uptime. Those are the choices that cost Caterpillar an entire continent. And those are the choices that American operators are watching very carefully right now. 30 years ago, every major European job site ran American iron. Today, a generation of European operators has never sat in a cat cab. They run Volvo excavators and JCB backhoes and Liebherr cranes, and they have no reason to switch. The yellow giant from Illinois built something extraordinary across Europe in the decades after the war. And then, one decision at a time, it gave it all away. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.